Delaney Cross had been a forest ranger for 11 years before she took the posting at Station 7 in the Okanagan-Wenatchee National Forest. Most rangers her age were angling for promotions or transfers closer to civilization. Delaney put in for the most remote assignment on the board, without a second thought. The station sat at the end of a gravel road that turned to mud every time it rained and flooded completely every spring. The nearest town was a 2-hour drive on a good day. Cell service was non-existent past the first ridge. She had a satellite phone for emergencies and a radio that crackled more than it worked. The previous ranger had left behind a coffee maker with a crack carafe and a note that said good luck taped to the refrigerator. Delaney threw the note away and ordered a new carafe. She had not taken this posting because she needed luck. She had taken it because she needed quiet. 11 years on the job had given her search and rescue call-outs in blizzards and wildfire evacuations, and enough paperwork to wallpaper her entire apartment back in Spokane. None of that was the reason she left. The reason she left was personal, and she kept it that way. The forest asked no questions, and that suited her fine. She settled into the rhythm of the posting quickly. Morning patrols along the eastern trails before the heat built up. Afternoon radio check-ins with the regional dispatch that usually lasted under 3 minutes. Evening paperwork that was mostly permit filings and weather logs. She was good at the routine. She had always been good at routine. It kept the other things at a manageable distance. Her first 2 weeks passed without incident. She cataloged trail erosion on the northern loop. She replaced 2 damaged trail markers near the creek crossing at mile 9. She filed her daily reports and ate her dinners alone at the small table by the station window and watched the tree line go dark at dusk the way it did every evening, like something pulling a curtain closed. She did not mind the solitude. She had been working toward it for longer than she wanted to admit. The first report came in on a Tuesday in her 3rd week. A camper named Paul Mercer called the station from a payphone in a town 40 miles south. His voice was steady, but something underneath it was not. He said he had been camping at Site 14 on the Boundary Creek Trail when he woke up at approximately 3 a.m. to find a man sitting at his campfire. Delaney asked the standard questions. Had the man threatened him? Had the man taken anything? Was the man still at the site? Mercer said no to all 3. He said the man had just been sitting there staring into the fire. He said he had watched him for what felt like several minutes, and then he had gone back to sleep. Delaney asked him why he went back to sleep. There was a long pause before Mercer answered. He said he did not know. He said it was the strangest thing, and that he had been trying to figure out ever since. He described the man as older, late 60s maybe, white hair that was thick and overgrown, dark heavy coat, even though the night had not been particularly cold. The man had not spoken, had not looked up, had not acknowledged Mercer at all, just sat there with his head slightly bowed toward the flames like he had been there for hours. Delaney took the report and filed it under miscellaneous incidents. Backcountry transients were not unheard of. People lived off the grid in these forests more often than the public realized. She noted the location and moved on. The second report came in 4 days later. A woman named Carol Finch had been camping with her husband at a site on the northern loop of the Cascade Crest Trail when she woke in the night to find the same man sitting at their fire. Same description, almost word for word. Older man, white hair, dark coat, staring into the flames. Her husband had not woken up. She had watched the figure for a while, and then she had lain back down and closed her eyes. When her husband woke her in the morning, she could not explain to him why she had gone back to sleep. She told Delaney that part twice, like it was the thing that bothered her most, not the man, the fact that she had gone back to sleep. Delaney pulled up the map and marked the second location, 14 miles north of the first. She noted the similarity in the descriptions and flagged both reports for follow-up. By the end of her 4th week, there were 7 reports on her desk, each one describing the same man at a different campsite. The location spread across a 40-mile stretch of wilderness. The descriptions were nearly identical across all 7. Old man, white hair, dark coat, head bowed toward the fire, never speaking, never moving except for that slight tilt of the head when the camper stirred. Every single caller mentioned going back to sleep. Not one of them could explain it. Delaney spread the reports across her desk and read them in order. Then she read them again. She had worked enough search and rescue to know that eyewitness accounts were unreliable. People in the dark saw what their tired minds expected to see. But 7 reports with this level of consistency across this much geographic distance was not eyewitness error. That was a pattern. She pulled out a paper map and started marking the locations with a red pen. She worked slowly and carefully because she wanted to be sure. When she had all 7 marked, she stepped back and looked at the map from a few feet away. Her stomach dropped. The marks were not scattered. They were not random. They formed a shape, almost a perfect circle. She leaned in closer and traced the shape with her finger. If the pattern held the circle was centered on a section of forest approximately 8 miles across. She checked the map legend and the regional survey notes clipped to the board beside it. The area at the center of the circle had no designated trails, no campsite markers, no maintenance roads, no fire lookout history, no reason for anyone to have ever been in there. She stared at that blank section of map for a long time. Then she went back to her desk and started pulling older records. She requested incident reports and missing persons filings going back 20 years from the regional database. The system was slow and the connection kept dropping, but she was patient. What came back over the next 2 days changed the way she was looking at everything. The campers who had filed the campfire reports were not the only ones who had come out of this forest different. Over the past 2 decades, there have been 14 documented cases of hikers being evacuated from this stretch of wilderness in states of significant disorientation. 6 of them had missing time they could not account for. 3 have been found miles from their last known location with no memory of how they got there. 1 man had been airlifted out and had not spoken a single word in the 3 days following his rescue. The medical reports listed his condition as acute psychological trauma of undetermined origin. He had eventually recovered partial speech, but the incident report noted he refused to discuss what had happened in the forest. Delaney read every file twice. She looked for common denominators, weather events, trail conditions, equipment failures. She found none that held across all 14 cases. What she did find was that 9 of the 14 had filed campfire sighting reports before their incidents. 9 out of 14 had seen the man at the fire before something happened to them. She sat with that number for a long time. Then she opened the missing persons database and searched the same geographic area over the same 20-year window. There were 3 open cases. 2 hikers and 1 off-trail enthusiast who had gone into this section of forest and never come out. Search and rescue had found no remains, no gear, no trace. She printed the files and added them to the growing stack on her desk. 1 of the missing hikers had filed a campfire report 2 days before he disappeared. She looked at her map again, at that blank circle in the center, at the ring of red marks surrounding it like a boundary. She had been a ranger for 11 years. She had seen plenty of things in remote wilderness that did not have clean explanations, but she had never seen anything that looked like this. Something had been happening in this forest for at least 20 years, possibly longer. Whatever was going on inside, that circle was not random. It was deliberate. She pulled on her jacket and walked to the window. Outside the forest, ran right up to the edge of the station clearing. The tree line was dark even in the afternoon light. She had walked those trails every day since arriving and felt nothing out of place. The birds were normal. The deer came through the clearing at dusk the way deer do. Nothing had given her any reason to feel the way she felt right now standing at this window with a map full of red marks behind her. She picked up the satellite phone and called her supervisor, Captain Jim Haskell, at the regional office. She gave him a summary of what she had found. There was a long silence on the other end. Haskell told her to send the files through the system and let the regional team review them. He told her not to go off trail until they had a chance to look at the data. His voice had something in it she could not quite name. Not concerned exactly. Something more careful than that. Something that sounded almost practiced, like a man who had been asked a question before and had a prepared answer ready. She told him she understood and ended the call. She set the satellite phone down on the desk beside the stack of files. Outside the window, the tree line had gone fully dark. The last of the afternoon light was gone from the clearing. She sat alone in the station with 20 years' worth of other people's worst moments spread across her desk. She looked at the map one final time, at the blank center, at all those red marks ringing it like something trying to contain what was inside. She had told Haskell she understood. She had not told him what she was going to do about it. The next morning, she was back at her desk before the sun cleared the eastern ridge. She pulled every campfire report again and read them with fresh eyes. She paid attention to details she had glossed over the first time. The dates, the weather conditions on each night, the specific campsites. She cross-referenced the sighting dates against the regional weather logs and found nothing significant. Clear nights mostly. A couple with light overcast. No storms. No unusual temperature drops. She pulled the permit records for each campsite on each date and confirmed that every camper who had filed a report had a valid permit. They were not trespassers. They were not people looking for trouble. They were ordinary people who had come out to the backcountry to sleep under trees and breathe clean air. Whatever had found them out, there had not been looking for a certain kind of person. Or maybe it had. Maybe she just had not figured out what kind yet. She added 3 more red marks to her map from newer reports that had come in overnight through the regional system. 10 marks now. The circle was cleaner than ever. She stared at it until her coffee went cold. Then she picked up a pencil and drew a small cross at the center of the circle. That was where she was going. She just had not decided exactly when. Delaney spent the better part of 2 days trying to reach Paul Mercer by phone. The number he had left on his report rang through to a voicemail box that was full. She tried the regional directory and found a Paul Mercer in Ellensburg who matched the age range from the report. She left a message. He called back the following morning, and she could tell within the first 30 seconds that he had been waiting for someone to call. He said he had not told his wife the full version of what happened at the campsite. He had told her the short version. Strange man near the fire. Nothing happened. Probably a drifter. He said the short version was the only way he had been able to keep it feeling manageable. Delaney asked him to tell her the full version. Mercer was quiet for a moment. Then he said the thing that bothered him most was not the man himself. It was the feeling that came with seeing him. He said the moment he opened his eyes and saw the figure across the fire, something happened to him that he had no word for. Not fear exactly. He knew what fear felt like. This was something else. Something that came from the outside and settled into him like a temperature change. Like the air pressure in his chest dropped. He said his body told him to go back to sleep before his mind had a chance to weigh in. He said it was the most frightening thing he had ever experienced, and the worst part was how calm it felt. Delaney wrote everything down. She asked him if he remembered anything after going back to sleep. He said he did not. He said he woke up at first light, and the fire was out, and the man was gone, and everything looked exactly as it should. He said he packed up and left without eating breakfast, and drove the full 2 hours home without stopping. He said he had not been back to the backcountry since. She thanked him and ended the call. She sat for a moment with her notes in front of her. Then she called Carol Finch. Carol picked up on the second ring, like she had been sitting beside the phone. Her account matched Mercer's in the details she had already given, but when Delaney pressed her on the feeling, she described it almost identically. Something that came from outside, something that bypassed whatever part of the brain makes decisions. Carol said she had been a nurse for 19 years, and she had a working understanding of how the body responds to threat. She said what happened to her that night was not a fear response. She said it was more like being switched off, like a light going out. She said she was aware of going back to sleep the way you are aware of going under anesthesia, present one moment and simply not there the next. Delaney asked her if she had experienced anything unusual in the weeks following the incident. Carol paused. Then she said yes. She said for about 10 days after the camping trip, she had periods where she could not account for small chunks of time. Nothing dramatic. 15 minutes here, half an hour there. She said she had chalked it up to stress and had not mentioned it to anyone. She had not connected it to the campsite until right now. Delaney thanked her and set the phone down. She added Carol's follow-up details to her notes and read back through everything she had written. 2 witnesses, nearly identical accounts. The same inexplicable compulsion to go back to sleep. The same description of the feeling as something external rather than internal. And now a report of minor time loss in the days following. She thought about the 14 evacuation cases, the 6 with missing time, the 3 found miles from their last location. She thought about the man who had not spoken for 3 days. She was starting to build a picture, and she did not like what it looked like. She requested the full archive files from the Forest Service Regional Office that afternoon. She asked specifically for any documentation related to the central section of the wilderness area, incident reports, survey records, any historical filings. The request went to a clerk named Doug Farrell in the Wenatchee office. Farrell called her back within the hour, which was faster than she expected. He told her the archive files for that section of the forest were flagged for regional review and could not be released to individual station rangers without supervisor approval. Delaney asked him when that flag had been placed on the files. Farrell said he could not tell her that. She asked him who had placed it. He said he could not tell her that either. His voice was not unfriendly, but it was firm in a way that someone is firm when they have been told exactly what to say. She thanked him and called Haskell. Haskell did not answer. She left a message asking about the file restriction and requesting supervisor approval to access the archive. He did not call back that day. She went back to what she had. She spread everything across the desk and the floor around it because the desk was no longer big enough. She worked through the night with the station radio on low. At some point around 2 a.m., she stopped and looked at what she had assembled and felt a shift in the way she understood the problem. The campfire sightings were not the event. They were the edges of the event. Whatever was happening to people in this forest was happening after the sighting. The figure at the fire was a constant, a fixture, something that appeared at the boundary of whatever this thing was. And then the real event occurred during the hours the witnesses could not remember. She thought about what Carol had said. Switched off like a light. She thought about August Rowe. She had found his name buried in one of the evacuation files. He was a hiker who had been airlifted out and had not spoken for 3 days. The file listed a contact address in Wenatchee. She did not know if he still lived there. She did not know if he would talk to her. But he was the closest thing she had to someone who had been to the full event and come out the other side. She wrote his name at the top of a fresh page and circled it. In the morning, she would find him. Outside the station, the forest was completely silent. She had noticed over the past few weeks that the forest at night usually had a baseline of sound. Insects whined through the upper canopy. The occasional movement of animals in the brush at the tree line. Tonight, there was nothing. She stood at the window for a long time listening to the silence. Then she went back to her desk and kept working. She did not sleep that night, not because she was afraid. because she had learned a long time ago that the things worth being afraid of were the ones that looked the most like nothing at all. She added 10 more red marks to her map. Before morning, from the older archive reports she had been able to access through the public database. The circle was now undeniable. 23 marks. Perfect ring. Blank center. She drew a slow line from the center of the circle to the station location on the map. The station sat just outside the eastern edge of the ring. She had been living at the boundary of this thing since the day she arrived. She just had not known it until now. She found an address for August rode through the county property records the next morning. He was still in Wenatchee. She tried the number listed, and it rang 6 times before a man answered with a voice that was low and careful in the way of someone who had learned to be deliberate with words. She told him who she was. She told him she was investigating a series of incidents in the forest, and that his name had come up in an old evacuation file. There was a long silence. Then he said he had been wondering when someone was going to call. He said he had been waiting for that call for 4 years. She asked if she could drive out to speak with him in person. He said yes, but he asked her one question first. He asked her if she had been inside the circle yet. She asked him how he knew about the circle. He said everyone who looks long enough figures out the circle. He said the circle is the easy part. He said what matters is what she finds when she goes into it, and whether she is ready for what comes back out with her. Delaney wrote that down word for word. She read it back to herself twice. She told him she would be there the following afternoon. After she hung up, she sat very still at her desk for a full minute. Then she picked up her pen and wrote one line at the bottom of her notes page. She underlined it 3 times. The circle is the easy part. She looked at her map, at the blank center, at 23 red marks, holding the shape of something she still did not have a name for. She had a name for what she felt, though. It was the same thing she had felt the day she left Spokane and drove north toward the mountains with nothing but her gear and her reasons in the back of the truck. The feeling of moving towards something that had already decided it was a changer. She had not known what it was then. She was beginning to think she knew what it was now. She checked her pack and her fuel supply for the drive. She would meet August Rowe tomorrow. She would go into the center of that circle the day after. Whatever was in there had been operating in this forest for decades without anyone stopping it. She was going to be the person who looked it directly in the face. She had no way of knowing yet whether that was brave or whether it was exactly what it wanted. She spent the rest of that evening going back through the missing persons files one more time. 3 open cases. She pulled up what photographs were available in the public record. A man in his 40s who had gone on a solo hiking permit and never returned. A woman in her late 20s who had been reported overdue by her hiking partner who had left the trail early due to a twisted ankle. A retired schoolteacher in his 60s who had told his daughter he was going for a 3-day backcountry trip and simply never came home. 3 different kinds of people, 3 different seasons. She looked for what they had in common beyond the campfire reports they had each filed. The man in his 40s had a history of solo trips and was considered experienced. The woman in her 20s was newer to backcountry hiking, but had completed a wilderness safety course the month before her trip. The retired schoolteacher had been hiking in these mountains his entire adult life. Experience level was not the factor. She looked at the dates of their campfire reports relative to the dates they went missing. 2 days, 3 days, 2 days. Each of them had seen the figure at the fire, and then gone missing within 3 days. Not immediately, not the same night. 3 days later at most. Like whatever happened at the fire was not the end of the event. It was the beginning of it. Something was started at those campsites in the dark while people slept. Something that finished on its own timeline. She felt the back of her neck go tight as she wrote that down. She looked at the calendar on the wall. She had been at Station 7 for just under 5 weeks. She had not camped in the backcountry since arriving. She had not been inside the circle. She had not seen the figure. Whatever the timeline was, she had not started the clock yet. She intended to be ready before she did. August Rowe lived in a small house on the east side of Wenatchee with curtains drawn on every window. Delaney pulled up in her Ranger truck and sat for a moment before getting out. The house looked lived in, but closed off. She knocked, and he answered quickly. He was a lean man in his late 40s with close cropped gray hair and the kind of stillness that comes from either a lot of therapy or a lot of time spent being very careful. He looked at her badge and then at her face and stepped back to let her in. The inside was clean and spare. A table with 2 chairs. He made coffee without asking if she wanted any. She noticed no personal photographs on the walls. Nothing that would tell a visitor much about who he was. She recognized the arrangement. She had done something similar to her own space after Spokane. He sat down across from her and wrapped both hands around his mug and looked at her steadily. She asked him to tell her what happened in the forest 4 years ago. He told her to ask specific questions because he had learned that telling it as a story made it harder to get through. She asked him about the campfire sighting first. He described it the same way Mercer and Finch had. The figure, the coat, the white hair, the stillness, the feeling of being switched off. He used almost the same phrase Carol Finch had used without knowing it. Switched off. She noted that and asked him what he remembered after going back to sleep. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he remembered pieces. Not a continuous sequence, but fragments. Like photographs out of order with no context. He said the first fragment was being on his feet in complete darkness with no idea how he had gotten there. Not at his campsite. Somewhere else. Somewhere with no trail beneath him and no sky visible above him through the canopy. He said he had no sense of how far he had walked or in what direction. He said his pack was gone. His boots were still on. He said in the fragment he was not afraid. He said that was the detail that haunted him the most. He should have been terrified. He was alone in deep wilderness in the dark with no gear and no sense of direction. He felt nothing. Not calm exactly. More like emptied out. Like whatever generates fear and self-preservation had been turned down to zero. She wrote that down carefully. She asked about the next fragment. He said the next thing he remembered was being on his knees on the ground with his hands pressed flat against the soil. He said the ground was warm. Not slightly warm. Warm the way skin is warm. He said he could feel something through his palms. Not vibration exactly. More like a pulse. Slow and steady and deep. Like something very large breathing far below the surface. He had pulled his hands away and the feeling had stopped, and the next fragment was daylight and voices and a rescue team standing over him. He had been found 4 miles from his campsite in a section of forest with no trails. He had no memory of the hours between the warm ground and the rescue team. He had been missing for 31 hours. She put her pen down for a moment. She looked at him across the table. He looked back at her without flinching. She asked him about the 3 days after. He said the silence had not been a choice. He said when he opened his mouth to speak after the rescue, no sound came out. Not because he was unwilling. Because whatever mechanism produces, speech was simply not working. He said it had come back gradually. Single syllables first, then short words. Full sentences by the end of the 3rd day. He said the doctors had no explanation. He said he had his own explanation, but that he had stopped sharing it with people because of how they responded. She asked him what his explanation was. He said he believed something had used him, not harmed him in any physical sense. Used him the way you use a tool. Picked him up and put him down somewhere else, and the 3 days of silence was just a recovery time his body needed after being operated by something that did not know or care how human biology worked. She sat with that for a moment. She asked him if he had ever gone back to the forest. He said no. She asked him if he knew what it was. He looked at his coffee. Then he looked back at her. He said he had spent 4 years reading everything he could find about that stretch of wilderness. Indigenous oral histories, geological surveys, folklore collections from the early settlement period. He said the thing in that forest was not new. It had been there long before the Forest Service existed, long before any of the maps. He said the old accounts called it different things depending on who was describing it, but the consistent element across all of them was the same, something that used living things as instruments and had been doing so for as long as anyone had kept records. She asked him what it wanted. He said he did not think one was the right word for something that old. He said it did not want the way people want. It operated. It processed. It had a function the way a natural system has a function, and the people who wandered into range of it were just the material it worked with. She asked him about the figure at the campfire. He said the figure was not the thing itself. He was certain of that. He said the figure was something else entirely. He said in the old accounts there was always a description of a presence at the boundary, something that appeared at the edge of the event. He believed the figure was either a warning being generated by the thing itself for reasons he could not explain, or something separate that was drawn to the same location the way certain animals are drawn to a predator's territory. He did not know which. She gathered her notes and stood to leave. At the door, he stopped her. He said he had one more thing to tell her. He said the thing in the forest had a reach. It was not contained to the center of the circle. The campfire sightings prove that. The boundary of its influence extended out to where the sightings occurred and possibly further. He said she should consider the possibility that it had already been aware of her since she arrived at Station 7. She drove back to the forest in silence. The mountains came up around the road, and the tree line closed in on both sides. She thought about what Roe had said about the station, sitting at the edge of the circle. She thought about her first 2 weeks. The routine, the quiet, how quickly she had settled in, how little resistance she had felt to being there. She reached the station as the sun dropped behind the western ridge and went straight to her desk. She pulled a map off the wall and folded it into her pack. Tomorrow she was going into the center of that circle. She was going in with her eyes open and her recorder running and her full attention on everything around her. Whatever was in there had been operating without anyone looking directly at it for a very long time. That was going to change tomorrow. She checked her gear and set her alarm and lay down on her cot without undressing. She stared at the ceiling in the dark and listened to the forest outside the station walls. It was completely silent again, the same silence as 2 nights ago. She had thought that first night that the silence was peace. She understood now that it was something listening. She was up before her alarm and on the trail before full light. The eastern approach to the center of the circle was 7 miles of mixed terrain. The first 4 miles followed an established trail before it terminated at a boundary marker. She had her pack loaded with 3 days of supplies, her recorder running from the moment she left the station. She talked into it as she walked, noted the time, noted the trail conditions, noted the light and the temperature and the sounds around her. The forest on the established trail was normal, birds in the canopy, a pair of mule deer that crossed the path ahead and paused before moving on. The ordinary texture of a functioning wilderness. She reached the boundary marker at mile 4 and stopped. The marker was an old wooden post with bark growing around its base. No signage, just the post. The trail ended on one side, and on the other was unbroken forest with no path. She stood at the marker for a full minute. Then she stepped past it. The change was not dramatic. There was no sudden silence, no temperature drop, no feeling of wrongness that hit her all at once. It was more gradual than that. Over the next mile, the birds became less frequent, then absent. The wind dropped until the canopy was completely still. The light came through at the same angles but felt flatter, like the quality had changed without the source changing. She kept her recorder going, and described everything she noticed. She was a scientist about it. She was a ranger. She dealt in observable facts, and she cataloged every observable fact she could identify. By the 6th mile, she had not heard a single bird for 40 minutes. The ground underfoot had changed texture. Less leaf litter. More bare soil between the roots. The trees themselves looked healthy, but the undergrowth had thinned to almost nothing. She stopped and crouched and pressed her hand flat against the bare soil between 2 roots. It was not warm. She held her hand there for 30 seconds. Nothing. She stood and kept moving. She reached the approximate center of the circle just past the 7th mile. She knew it by the compass readings she had been tracking against the map. There was nothing visually distinctive about the location. It was a shallow depression in the forest floor roughly 40 feet, across ringed by older growth timber. The trees around the depression were larger than anything she had passed on the way in. Old growth, some of them 4 and 5 feet across at the base. She walked the perimeter of the depression slowly. She looked for any sign of human activity or structural remains. She found nothing obvious at first. Then she found the stones. Smooth river stones arranged just inside the tree line with no natural reason to be there. No water source within miles. She counted 11 of them spaced unevenly around the depression. She photographed each one and recorded their positions. She did not touch them. She stood in the center of the depression and turned slowly. The silence was total. She had been in quiet forest before. This was not the same quality of quiet. This was an absence, like the space between sounds had been removed, and what was left was not silence, but something that had replaced it. She stood very still and felt it around her. Then her radio crackled once and went dead. She checked it. Full battery. She tried the satellite phone. No signal. She was not surprised. She had half expected it. She set up her camp at the edge of the depression before the light failed. She ate and kept a recorder running and wrote in her field notebook by headlamp. At some point after midnight, she stopped writing and listened. The absence of sound was unchanged. She had not lit a fire. She had decided before coming in that she would not light a fire tonight. She wanted to observe first. She wanted to see the full shape of the thing before she put herself in its path. She lay in her tent with the flap slightly open and watched the depression and the tree line beyond it. Nothing moved. Nothing changed. She stayed awake until 3 a.m. by her watch. Nothing came. She was almost disappointed. She closed the tent flap and lay back and thought about what Ro had said, about reach, about awareness. She thought about the station at the edge of the circle. She thought about how settled she had felt since arriving, how quickly the quiet had felt like home. She closed her eyes. She did not intend to sleep. She slept, and when she woke, the fire was going. She had not lit one. She woke to the sound of fire, not the crackle of it exactly, but the presence of it. The light through the tent fabric was orange and moving. She lay still for a moment and listened. The silence was the same as before. Total, unchanged, but the light was wrong. She had not lit a fire. She had been deliberate about that. She unzipped the tent flap slowly and looked out. The fire was burning in the center of the depression 20 feet from her tent. A proper fire, built with intention, not a stray ember, not a trick of light. Someone or something had built a fire in the center of the depression while she slept. She checked her watch. 3:14 a.m. She felt her breath go shallow, and she made herself slow it down. She was a ranger. She dealt in observable facts. Observable fact 1, there was a fire. Observable fact 2, she had not built it. Observable fact 3, she was still inside the circle. She reached for her recorder and pressed record and described what she was seeing in a low, steady voice. Then she looked past the fire. He was there, sitting on the far side of the flames exactly as every report had described. Dark coat, white hair, head slightly bowed toward the fire, completely still. She watched him for a full minute without moving. He did not look up. He did not acknowledge her. He sat with the stillness of something that had been sitting in that exact position for a very long time. She felt the thing the witnesses had described, the external pressure, the drop in whatever kept a person in their own body and making their own decisions. It came at her like a slow tide, and she pushed back against it consciously and deliberately, the way you lean into a physical weight. She kept her eyes open. She kept the recorder running. She did not go back to sleep. She spoke into the recorder. She said she was observing the figure. She said she was maintaining full awareness. She said the compulsion to sleep was present, and she was resisting it. She described the fire, the figure, the temperature, the silence. She talked because talking kept her tethered. The figure did not react to her voice. It sat. It stared into the flames. She watched it for 20 minutes, and it did not move once. Then it moved, not toward her, not dramatically. It lifted its head slowly and turned it to the left, away from her, toward the tree line on the northern edge of the depression. It held that position. Head turned, still, like it was listening to something at the tree line that she could not hear. She shifted her gaze to the tree line. The darkness between the old-growth trunks was absolute. She clicked on her headlamp and directed it toward the northern edge. The beam caught nothing but trees and bare soil and the low gray fog that had settled along the ground sometime during the night. She turned the headlamp off. She looked back at the figure. It was still facing the tree line. She looked back at the tree line. She looked for a long time. Then she saw it. Movement in the dark between two of the large trunks. Not the movement of an animal. Not the movement of wind and brush. Something that moved with intention. Something large. It was hard to gauge the size in the darkness, but the portion of it she could make out between the trunks was broad and tall and moved with a heaviness that displaced the fog around it as it came forward. She did not move. She pressed record on her second recorder as a backup and set it on the ground outside the tent. The thing at the tree line stopped at the edge of the depression. It did not step into the firelight. It stayed just far enough back that the light did not fully resolve it. She could see the outline. She could see it was not human. She could see it was aware of her in the way large predators are aware, not looking at her exactly, oriented toward her. She felt the pressure change. The tide that had been pushing towards sleep reversed direction and became something else entirely. Alert, spiked. Her body understood the difference between the two things, even if her mind was still catching up. The figure at the fire had generated a compulsion toward unconsciousness. What was standing at the tree line generated the opposite, total animal wakefulness, the kind that happens when something with teeth gets close. She did not run. Running was the worst option in every scenario she could construct. She sat in the mouth of her tent and kept both recorders going and watched the shape at the tree line and waited. It stood at the edge of the depression for what her watch told her was 11 minutes. Then it withdrew. Not quickly. It moved back into the trees with the same heavy, deliberate movement, and the fog closed in behind it. She exhaled slowly. She looked back at the fire. The figure was gone. The fire was still burning. She sat in the mouth of her tent until first light came through the canopy. She did not sleep. When the light was strong enough, she walked the perimeter of the depression and examined the northern tree line where the shape had been. She found impressions in the soft soil at the edge of the trees, not footprints in any shape she recognized. Depressions, evenly spaced, each one roughly the diameter of a dinner plate, pressed several inches into the ground. She photographed them and measured the spacing. 31 inches between each depression. She followed them back into the trees for about 40 feet before they became harder to track on the drier ground. She went back to her camp and broke it down with efficient, focused movements. She needed to get back to the station. She needed to think. She needed to get everything she had recorded into a format she could work with. She also needed to tell someone what she had found in a way that would not get her removed from the posting before she understood what she was dealing with. She shouldered her pack and took one last look at the depression. The fire had burned down to ash. The stones were still in their positions around the perimeter. She looked at the ash and then at the stones. Then she noticed something she had not noticed before. There was a 12th stone. She had counted 11 the day before. She was certain of it. She had photographed all 11 and recorded their positions. There were now 12. The new stone was on the northern side of the depression, closest to the tree line, closest to where the shape had stood. She stared at it for a long time. Then she turned and walked back toward the trail, without looking back. Whatever was in that forest had been operating for longer than anyone had recorded. It had been watched by people before, and those people had come out wrong, or had not come out at all. She intended to be different. She hiked the 7 miles back to the station in under 2 hours. She sat down at her desk and plugged in both recorders and started transcribing from beginning. Outside the window, the forest was quiet in the way it always was now. She knew what that quiet meant. She no longer found it comforting. She found it informative. Something in there was aware of her. It had been aware of her since she arrived. The only difference now was that she was aware of it back. She spent 3 hours transcribing both recordings and organizing her notes into a timeline. She cross-referenced everything against the files on her desk. The evacuation cases, the missing persons, the campfire reports. She was looking for anything in the existing documentation that matched what she had witnessed in the depression. She found it in the oldest file she had, a Forest Service incident report from 1987, describing the evacuation of a solo hiker who had been found unresponsive at the edge of the unmarked central area. The hiker had recovered and given a statement. The statement had been filed and apparently never followed up on. She read it twice. The hiker described waking to a fire he had not lit. He described a figure at the fire. He described something at the tree line that had not come into the light. His language was different from hers, but the sequence was identical. Fire, figure, shape at the edge. This had been happening since at least 1987, probably longer. She looked at the date on the report. 38 years ago. She thought about what Roe had said, that the old accounts went back further than any of the maps. She opened her laptop and pulled up every digitized historical record she could access for the Okanagan-Wenatchee region. She was looking for anything that matched the pattern. She found references in a 1934 Forest Service survey that noted the central section was considered impassable by local indigenous guides who refused to enter it. The survey noted this as a curiosity and moved on. She found a reference in settler journals from the 1880s describing a section of the mountains where livestock went missing and dogs refused to travel. She found an account from an 1890s prospecting party describing a member who had wandered off one night and been found the next morning unable to speak. The account said the man never recovered his speech fully. She sat back in her chair. The pattern went back at least 140 years in the written record. Whatever was in that forest predated every human presence in the region. It had been there before the roads, before the trails, before the maps. It had been operating on its own timeline in its own territory, and the occasional human who wandered into range was simply part of the landscape it worked with. She thought about what that meant for the 3 missing hikers. She thought about August Rowe on his knees with his hands against warm ground. She thought about what he said about being used, about being operated by something that did not understand human biology. She thought about the people who had come out unable to speak. She thought about the ones who had come out missing time. She thought about the one who had not come out at all. She called Haskell again. He answered this time. She told him she had gone into the central section. His silence on the other end was longer than usual. She told him what she had found. The stones, the fire, the figure, the shape at the tree line, the impressions in the soil. She described everything in plain, factual language, and when she finished, there was another long silence. Then Haskell said he was going to need her to write up a formal incident report and send it through the system. He told her to stay out of the central section until regional review was complete. His voice had the same practice quality it had before, the same careful steadiness. She asked him directly if he had known about the 1987 incident report. The silence that followed was answer enough. She told him she would send the incident report. She ended the call. She sat for a moment. Then she picked up her pen and started writing. Not the incident report. That could wait. She was writing down everything August Rowe had told her about the old accounts. The thing that used living things as instruments. The boundary presence at the edge of the event. The function of a natural system that had been running long before anyone named it. She wrote for an hour without stopping. When she finished, she had 4 pages of dense notes and one question at the top of a fresh page that she had underlined 3 times. If the figure of the fire was not the threat, but a warning, then what exactly was it warning people about? She had seen the shape at the tree line. She had seen what it did to the fog. She had felt what it did to her nervous system. She thought she might already have her answer. She just did not want it to be right. She spent the next 2 days going back through every victim file with a single focused question. What do they have in common? Not the obvious things. Not the forest. Not the campfire sighting. Something personal. Something they carried with them into the backcountry. She had been turning this over since the night in the Depression, and she kept returning to the same feeling that the pattern was not random. The thing in that forest was old, and it operated with function the way Rowe had described. A natural system. Natural systems do not select randomly. They select for something. She read the evacuation files again. She read the missing persons files again. She read the campfire reports again. She started pulling whatever personal background she could find in the public record for each person involved. Property records, court filings, newspaper mentions, anything that gave her a picture of who these people were outside the forest. It took most of 2 days, and what she assembled was not a clean answer. It was more like a shape emerging from fog. The people who had come out of that forest changed or missing were not a homogeneous group. Different ages, different backgrounds, different reasons for being in the backcountry. But there was a thread. Not all of them, but enough of them. Enough to make the shape visible. Loss, not the ordinary grief of a life lived. Something more acute. Something unresolved. Paul Mercer had lost a son 3 years before his camping trip. Carol Finch had told her almost in passing that she had been taking the backcountry trips after her divorce because being in the wilderness was the only place she felt like herself anymore. The man in his 40s who had gone missing had filed for bankruptcy 8 months before his last trip. His wife had left him 2 months after that. The retired schoolteacher who had never come home had a daughter who had died the year before. She did not have full backgrounds on everyone, but the ones she had told the same story. People carrying something heavy had wandered into range of something very old that apparently had a use for that particular kind of weight. She sat with that for a long time. Then she thought about why she had taken this posting. She thought about Spokane, about the things she had been carrying since she left. She had told herself it was about quiet, about needing distance. That was true, but it was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that she had needed to go somewhere that felt as empty as she did. The backcountry posting had felt right in a way that had nothing to do with professional ambition. She qualified. She had known it somewhere beneath conscious thought since she started reading these files, but she had not let herself look at it directly until now. Whatever selected the people who had been taken or changed in that forest would look at Delaney Cross and find exactly what it was looking for. She did not find this frightening in the way she expected. She found it clarifying. She knew what she was going to do. She had known since the night in the Depression. She was going back in, not to observe this time, to engage. She spent the rest of the day preparing. She charged both her quarters and added a third as backup. She prepared her pack with deliberate attention to everything she was bringing and everything she was leaving behind. She wrote out a full account of her investigation and sealed it in an envelope addressed to a journalist in Seattle she had met once at a regional land management conference. The journalist had given her a card and said, "Call me if you ever find something the Forest Service wants buried." She had kept the card. She put the envelope in the outgoing mail slot at the station. She called August Rowe. She told him she was going back in. She told him what she had figured out about the profile of the victims. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he had figured that out too. For years ago, she asked him if that was why he had answered her call. He said yes. He said he had been waiting for the ranger who fit the profile to finally connect the dots. She asked him if he had any advice. He said, "Do not fight the sleep if it comes." He said fighting it was what caused the damage in most of the cases he had researched. He said the ones who came out worse were the ones who had resisted. She asked him about the shape at the tree line. He said he did not know what that was. He said in 4 years of research, he had never found a clear account of it. He said whatever it was, it had not been part of his experience in the forest, and he could not tell her what it meant. She thanked him and ended the call. She stood at the window for a while. The tree line at the edge of the clearing was dark in the late afternoon light. She looked at it the way she might look at something she had misjudged. She had arrived here thinking she was running away from something. She was beginning to understand she had been moving toward this since before she had known it existed. She left the station at dusk. She made the 7 miles in the dark with her headlamp and arrived at the depression just before midnight. She set up her tent at the same location as before. She lay down without her boots and waited. She did not fight it when the sleep came. It came slowly the way Roe had described. A tide, a weight, a dropping of the pressure that kept her in herself. She let it happen. She kept her mind as present as she could, but she did not grip. She let the current take her the way you let a river take you. When fighting, it will only pull you under. The last thing she registered before she went under was the orange glow through the tent fabric. The fire was already going. What came after was not a dream. She understood that immediately. Dreams have the quality of something constructed from the inside. This was the opposite. This came from the outside and moved through her the way current moves through water. She was aware but not in control. Present but not the one deciding where her attention went. It directed her. She was standing in the depression, but the depression was different. The trees were older, much older. Trunks so wide she could not have wrapped her arms around them. The canopy so dense no sky was visible above. The fire was burning in the center, but the fire was different too. Higher, hotter, the kind of fire that takes a long time to build. She was standing at the edge of the firelight, and the figure was across from her, not seated this time. Standing. She could see him more clearly than she ever had in the reports or in her own previous observation. He was an old man, genuinely old in a way that went beyond age. His face was weathered past the point of readable expression. His white hair moved in a wind she could not feel. He was looking directly at her, not through her. At her. The first time in every account she had read, the figure had looked at someone directly. She did not feel the compulsion toward sleep anymore. She felt something else, an attention being paid to her, a weighing. She stood still and let it happen. The old man raised one hand and pointed, not at her, past her. She turned. The shape was at the tree line again, closer this time, close enough that the firelight caught the edge of it. She could see more of it than she had before. It was large, much larger than she had estimated from a distance. It stood at the edge of the light, and it was oriented toward her with that same quality of attention she had felt from the old man, not the same kind of attention. The old man's attention had felt like assessment, like being read. What was coming from the shape was different. Appetite was the closest word she had. Not hunger exactly. Something more systemic. the way a body is oriented toward oxygen, not wanting it, requiring it. She understood then what the old man was doing. He was not appearing at campsites to frighten people. He was not generating the sleep compulsion as an attack. He was showing people what was behind him. He had been standing between the shape and the people in its range, and the compulsion towards sleep was not a predatory mechanism. It was a door, a way of pulling people far enough under that the shape could not fully reach them. The ones who had resisted the sleep had been the ones most damaged, because resistance kept them in range longer. The ones who had gone fully under had come out the other side, less affected. The missing ones. She thought about the missing ones. She thought about what going fully under might mean if the door did not hold. She looked at the old man. He was still pointing past her. She turned back to the shape. It had moved closer. The fog around its base was roiling. She felt the thing Ro had described, the emptying out, the zeroing of self-preservation, not from the old man this time, from the shape. She felt herself beginning to go, not towards sleep, towards something that had no word she knew. She held on to one thing, the question she had written at the top of the page and underlined 3 times. She held it like a rope in a current. The old man stepped forward into the firelight for the first time. He moved between her and the shape. He was much taller than he had appeared seated. She could see his face clearly now. It was not a frightening face. It was a tired one, the face of something that had been doing a very difficult job for a very long time without relief. He looked at her with eyes that were pale and steady and very old. Then he spoke. He said one word. She heard it clearly. She understood it. She would think about that word for the rest of her life. Then everything went white, and she was on her back in her tent, and the light through the fabric was gray with early morning, and both recorders were still running, and she was completely alone. She lay still and ran a systems check on her body, the way she did after search and rescue operations. She was intact. She was oriented. She knew who she was and where she was and what day it was. She sat up slowly. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from the effort of having held on. She unzipped the tent and looked out at the depression. The fire was ash. The stones were in their positions. She counted them. 12. She looked at the tree line. Nothing. The forest was beginning to take on the pale gray light of early morning, and the first bird she had heard in 2 days called from somewhere in the canopy above her. She exhaled. She sat at the mouth of her tent for a long time. Then she reached over and stopped both recorders. She pressed play on the first one. Her own voice came back, describing the fire, and the figure, and the shape at the tree line. It was all there. She pressed stop. She sat with the recorder in her hand. She thought about the word the old man had said, what it meant and what it required of her, and whether she was the right person for what came next. She did not know the answer to that last part, but she knew she was the only person who had gotten this far and come back out with a recording. She packed her tent and shouldered her pack. She had 7 miles back to the station and a decision to make before she got there. The word the old man had said was stay. She turned it over the entire 7 miles back to the station. 1 syllable, plain as anything, but the weight behind it was not plain. She felt it in her sternum still, a vibration that had not fully faded. She reached the station and sat at her desk without taking her pack off. The thing in that forest had been operating for over a century in the documented record, and likely much longer. It had run without interruption, because no one had ever stayed long enough to understand the full shape of it. Rangers rotated out. Hikers came and went. The Forest Service filed reports and flagged archives. Nobody had planted themselves at the boundary and refused to move. She thought about the old man. He was not the threat. She was certain of that now. He had moved between her and the shape. He had absorbed whatever the shape directed at her in that final moment before everything went white. He had been standing at that boundary for a very long time doing something that looked like haunting, and was actually something closer to holding a line. She thought about his face, the exhaustion in it. She took her pack off and pulled out both recorders and her notebook. She opened her laptop and looked at the sealed envelope in the outgoing mail slot. The journalist in Seattle. She left it where it was. She opened a new document and started writing. Not a report, a full account. Everything from the first campfire report to the word in the depression. She wrote for 6 hours without stopping. When she finished, she had 31 pages. She saved 3 copies in 3 different locations and emailed one to a personal account she had not used in 2 years. Then she called Haskell. He answered on the second ring, which meant he had been waiting. She told him she was not sending the incident report through the system. She told him copies of her full account existed outside the Forest Service network. She told him she was staying at Station 7. Haskell said she did not understand what she was dealing with. She said she understood more than he did at this point. Another silence. Then Haskell said the central section had been flagged since 1991 following a cluster of incidents. The review concluded it was an anomalous zone of unknown origin. The recommended protocol was minimal engagement and containment through permit restriction. She asked if anyone had ever gone in with the intention of understanding it rather than just keeping people away. He said not that he knew of. She told him that was what she was going to do and ended the call. She got up and walked a window. The tree line was dark in the late evening light. She looked at it the way she looked at things she had decided to stop being afraid of. She had come to this posting running from something. The something had been running toward her at the same time. The forest had felt like home from the first day, because whatever was in it had recognized her before she recognized it. That should have been terrifying. It was not. It was the first thing in a long time that felt like it meant something. She spent the next 3 days building a proper research framework. She mapped every campfire sighting going back as far as records allowed. She documented the depression stones from her photographs and contacted a geology professor at the University of Washington. She described the stones without giving a location. The professor said stones of that composition would have originated from a glacial melt channel active approximately 11,000 years ago. The stones have been placed by something operating in this forest since the end of the last ice age. She added that to her document. On the 4th day, she drove to Wenatchee and knocked on August Rowe's door. He opened it and stepped back without a word. She told him everything that had happened in the depression on the second visit. The old man standing. The word. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he went to a back room and returned with a cardboard box. Inside were 4 years of his own research. Notes, photocopies, printed pages from digitized records. His version of what she had been building. It overlapped with her work in places and went further in others. He had found indigenous oral accounts she had not located. He had found a Forest Service Surveyor journal from 1952 that matched her observations closely. She asked if he wanted to work on this together. He said he had been hoping she would ask since the first phone call. She drove back with his box on the passenger seat. She set it beside her own files and stood at the window, looking at the tree line in the dark. The forest was silent the way it always was. She had learned to read that silence. It was not emptiness. It was density. Something very old filling the space between the trees and paying attention. She looked back at her desk, at the files and recordings and 31 pages, and Rowe's 4 years of work. Something in that forest had been operating without anyone truly seeing it for longer than recorded history. That was going to change. Outside, a new campfire report came in over the radio from a hiker 40 miles south. Same description. Old man, dark coat, white hair, staring into the flames. She reached over and picked up the radio. She was not going to file this one under miscellaneous incidents. She took the full report. A man in his 30s camping alone on Boundary Creek Trail. She asked the standard questions and then asked what he had been feeling before the sighting. He hesitated, said he had been going through something. She did not push. She knew what that meant now. She told him to pack out in the morning and not to fight the sleep if it came to night. He asked what that meant. She told him to trust her. She ended the call and added his location to the map. 27 marks now. The circle was holding. She sat back and thought about what the circle actually was. She had been reading it as the boundary of the thing's reach. She was beginning to wonder if it was a territory marker, not where the thing stopped, but where it started paying close attention. If the campfire sightings were intentional, then the old man was ranging the edge of the territory deliberately, drawing attention inward towards something that needed to be seen. She wrote new questions on a fresh page, not about what the thing was, about function, about what it needed from the people it pulled in, about whether the missing ones were gone entirely or whether gone meant something different here. She wrote until past midnight. Then she got up and retrieved the envelope from the mail slot. She held it for a moment, then she put it back. Releasing it now would bring the wrong attention before she was finished. It would pull her out of this posting and bury everything in a Federal review that would take years. She needed more time. She went back to her desk. Outside, the forest held its dense attending silence. She had stopped thinking of it as something watching her and started thinking of it as something she was watching back. She knew its shape and its history and its reach. She knew the old man was at the boundary doing something that looked like haunting and was actually something closer to guarding. She thought about relief, about what it would mean to give something that old and that tired a reason to stop. She did not have that answer yet. She was going to find it. She looked at the tree line one last time before turning off the lamp. The darkness between the trees was complete. She had learned to stop reading it as empty. There was more in it than she had words for yet. She was going to find the words. That was what staying meant. What the old man had asked for with one syllable pressed into her sternum like a coal. She turned off the lamp and picked up her pen and kept writing in the dark. She called the hiker back the following morning. His voice was steadier than the night before. He had slept. He did not remember everything, but he remembered more than most. He described the figure the same way everyone used. The stillness, the coat, the white hair. He said the strangest part was not being afraid. She told him that was normal. He asked what was actually out there. She told him she was working on a complete answer. She told him again to talk to someone when he got home. He said he would. She ended the call and looked at his name on her list. 22 people now documented in her personal file. Witnesses, evacuees, the recovered ones. She had phone numbers for 11 of them. She was going to call each one, not for the investigation exactly, because they deserved to know someone had looked at what happened to them and taken it seriously. She spent the afternoon reviewing Rowe's research box methodically. She had been through it once quickly, but now she went slowly. She found the indigenous oral history references he had mentioned. 2 of them were from a collection archived at the University of Washington. She requested access through the university library system using her Forest Service credentials. The 3rd reference was a handwritten summary Rowe had made from a source he had found in a private collection. The summary described a figure that appeared at the edge of a certain kind of darkness to warn travelers away. The account did not call the figure a ghost. It did not call it a spirit exactly. The word Rowe had transcribed from the original language translated roughly as the one who stays behind. She read that phrase 3 times. She wrote it at the top of a fresh page and sat with it for a long time. The one who stays behind. She thought about what you would have to be to do that, what it would require. She thought about how long 11,000 years was in human terms. Generation after generation moving through that forest. All of them encountering the same thing at the boundary. all of them coming out changed or not coming out at all. Somewhere at the center, a presence that had been there the whole time, not choosing to stay, chosen to stay. There was a difference. She underlined the phrase again. Then she wrote one more line beneath it and underlined that too. The job was always already waiting for the right person. She was not sure she was the right person. She was sure she was the person who was here. That had always been enough before. She got up and made coffee and stood at the window with a mug in both hands and looked at the tree line in the fading afternoon light. The forest was quiet in the way she had come to recognize as listening rather than empty. She looked back at it with the same quality of attention. Two old things taking stock of each other across a clearing. She thought about the hiker in his 30s who had seen the figure last night. She thought about Paul Mercer in Ellensburg, who could not explain why he went back to sleep. She thought about Carol Finch, who had used the exact same phrase as August Rowe without knowing it, switched off like a light. She thought about the man who had not spoken for 3 days. She thought about the three who had not come back. She thought about the old man at the fire with the exhausted face of something that had been doing a very difficult job for a very long time. She finished her coffee. She rinsed the mug and walked back to her desk and sat down and opened her laptop. She had work to do. The difference now was that she knew what the work actually was. Outside, the tree line held its silence and its density and its attention. She held hers back. The forest had been waiting a very long time for someone to stay. She was staying.